studio lights were blinding. The cameras rolled. Millions of Americans were watching live, glued to their TV screens. The air was thick with tension. This wasn't just another interview. It was the moment the world would see if Muhammad Ali, the world's most famous boxer, would fold under pressure. The question came sharp, direct, and loaded with expectation. Mystery. Ali, why won't you fight for your country? A pause, a heartbeat. The room seemed to stop breathing. The interviewer leaned forward, pen ready, eyes fixed, trying to catch the hesitation he expected. Every TV viewer at home leaned in, imagining the heavyweight champion squirming under the weight of duty, patriotism, and public opinion. Ali didn't blink, not once, not a twitch, not even a sigh. His eyes were calm, steady, unshakable. And then he spoke slowly, deliberately, as if every word were a carefully measured punch. I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. A ripple ran through the studio. Murmurs, gasps. Some viewers slammed their hands on the couch. Others froze. What did he just say? Did the champion of the world just refuse military service? Did he just defy the United States of America in front of millions? But Ali didn't stop there. He leaned back, arms folded, his voice calm, almost conversational. They never called me in for. They never put no chains on my hands. They never lynched me. The silence that followed was heavier than any punch Ali had ever thrown in the ring. This wasn't bravado. This wasn't a gimmick for the cameras. This was principle, conviction, courage that could not be bought, borrowed, or faked. For a country that saw its heroes as untouchable symbols of compliance and conformity, Ali's words hit like a hammer. Millions were shocked, outraged, inspired, sometimes all at once. The network cut to the commercial break, but the echo of his statement lingered in the minds of every viewer. People debated it on the streets, in offices, and in living rooms across America. This wasn't just a refusal to fight a war. It was a refusal to compromise his values, and everyone watching knew it. Because in that instant, Muhammad Ali wasn't just a boxer anymore. He was a man standing alone against the tide, a voice that wouldn't be silenced, a symbol of courage in a nation struggling to understand the cost of conscience. And the question everyone was left asking themselves was the same one Ali had just answered. How far would you go to stand for what you believe in? America was divided. The Vietnam War was raging overseas, and tensions at home were reaching a boiling point. Streets were filled with protests. Families were torn. Young men were being drafted, some reluctantly, some with fear. And the nation expected its heroes, especially its sports heroes, to stand in line, to serve, to set an example. But Muhammad Ali, already a superstar in the boxing world, had always done things on his own terms. Born Cassius Clay, he had risen from the streets of Louisville, Kentucky, to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history. He was fast, strong, confident, but most importantly, he was outspoken. He wasn't just a fighter in the ring. He was a thinker outside it. A man who refused to let the world define him. That morning, Ali stepped into a television studio in New York City, ready for a live interview that would soon become legendary. The cameras rolled, the lights shone harshly, and the producers whispered behind the scenes, anxious about how their audience would react. The public expected deference, a polite explanation for why he would go fight in Vietnam. Many thought Ali would cave under the weight of expectation, but they didn't know him. As he walked into the room, there was no entourage, no guards, no fanfare. Just Ali, calm, composed, and in his trademark loose suit, radiating quiet confidence. Reporters jotted notes. Producers checked cameras. Millions at home tuned in. They didn't yet know that they were about to witness a historic moment. The interviewer, a respected national figure, started cautiously, then gradually more aggressively. Every question aimed to corner Ali, to make him falter. Are you willing to serve your country? Do you think you're above the law? Do you respect the men fighting overseas? Every word was designed to provoke a reaction, to push him into compliance, but Ali remained unshaken. Every time they expected hesitation, he showed poise. Every time they expected submission, he showed resolve. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't defensive, he was deliberate. Every sentence, every pause, every glance was measured. Millions could feel it, even through the television screen. What Ali understood, and what millions would only later realize, was that this wasn't just a TV interview. This was a test of character. This was a moment where history would watch him, and where courage would be measured not by his punches, but by his principles. Refusing the draft wasn't simply a political statement, it was a moral stance. A statement that he would not compromise his beliefs, his religion, or his conscience for the approval of others, no matter the cost. As the minutes ticked by, tension in the studio grew. The audience, both live and at home, held its breath. Some saw rebellion, some saw disrespect, but others saw bravery. And in that charged atmosphere, Ali remained unwavering, a solitary figure standing firm in the eye of a storm that few could understand. This was more than a man refusing to fight a war. This was a cultural turning point. A heavyweight champion challenging societal expectations. And by the end of the interview, one thing was clear. The world wasn't just watching a fight for titles anymore, they were witnessing a fight for conscience. Muhammad Ali was about to make history, and nobody in that studio, or across the nation, would ever forget the words he was about to say. The room was tense, every eye fixed on Muhammad Ali. Every camera was rolling. Every microphone was live. Millions of Americans were watching at home, waiting for the moment the young heavyweight champion might falter. But Ali had never been one to follow the expected path. The interviewer leaned in, trying to catch a flicker of doubt. His voice sharpened, deliberate. "Are you afraid to fight, Mr. Ali?" A subtle murmur ran through the studio audience. Some shifted in their seats, sensing the weight of the question. Fear, they thought, might appear on this man's face. But Ali's calm gaze didn't waver. He sat tall, chest forward, hands resting lightly on his knees. His voice was quiet but carried an undeniable authority. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he said. A sharp intake of breath, silence, then a ripple of gasps. Some viewers at home slammed their hands onto the coffee table in shock. Some whispered to their spouses, trying to confirm what they had just heard. Did the world's most famous athlete just refuse military service? Did he just challenge the entire nation? Ali's calm didn't break. "They never called me a fasar. They never put chains on my hands. They never lynched me." The words landed like a punch. Hard, deliberate, unforgettable. The studio seemed to shrink around him. Producers behind the cameras exchanged worried glances. The interviewer's confidence wavered for the first time. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He had expected hesitation. He had expected excuses. He had expected fear. But Ali offered none of those. He offered truth. Every phrase Ali spoke was a masterclass in conviction. He wasn't simply rejecting the draft. He was forcing the world to confront uncomfortable truths. The nation, in its rush to celebrate heroes, had never considered the lives of those who were marginalized. And here was Muhammad Ali, unafraid, shining a light on the hypocrisy that millions would rather ignore. The studio audience was a mix of tension and awe. Some whispered, "How dare he say that?" Others thought, "Finally, someone with courage." Behind the cameras, assistants frantically took notes, unsure of what would make the evening news. Ali, meanwhile, remained composed. There was no fear in his voice. No arrogance, only clarity. The interviewer tried again, desperation creeping into his tone. "But you could go to jail, your career could be over. Do you realize the consequences?" Ali smiled faintly. It wasn't a mocking smile. It wasn't arrogance. It was confidence born from principle. "I don't care about jail. I don't care about what people think. I care about doing what's right. You can take my title. You can take my money. You can take my freedom. But you can't take my conscience." The room went even quieter. The weight of his words settled like a stone in every heart. Millions of Americans were hearing live, a man willingly accepting the cost of his moral stand. And yet, there was no anger, no self-pity, only unwavering resolve. Outside the studio, television sets buzzed in homes, bars, and workplaces. The nation was divided. Some shouted in outrage. Some cried in admiration. Newspapers the next day would struggle to capture the moment the man who could have been silent chose instead to speak, and history would never forget it. Ali continued, voice firm but steady. "I've been fighting all my life, not in the ring, but against injustice. I've been drafted by life to stand up for what's right. I can't let other people's wars become mine. I fight when it's my fight, and this is not my fight." By the end of the interview, the shock was palpable. The audience was hushed. The interviewer, now pale, scribbled furiously on his notepad, realizing he had just witnessed a pivotal moment in American history. Ali rose from his seat, calm as ever, and shook hands politely. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He had made his stand. The world had watched him, and nothing could erase it. For Ali, the fight had just begun, but this time the battle wasn't for a championship belt. It was for principle, for conscience, and for the courage to stand alone against the tide of a nation ready to demand obedience. And as the cameras stopped rolling, one thing was clear: Muhammad Ali had not just spoken. He had challenged a country to examine itself, and history would remember every word. The interview was over, but the world hadn't caught its breath yet. Television sets clicked off in homes, offices, and bars across the United States, but the words Muhammad Ali had spoken lingered like smoke in the air. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. They never called me Viet Cong. They never put chains on my hands. They never lynched me." Millions repeated the phrases aloud, unable to process their weight. In the days that followed, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Newspapers ran headlines designed to inflame outrage. Heavyweight champion defies America. Ali refuses duty, a national shame. Draft dodger or conscience hero. The words were debated in living rooms, lunchrooms, and city streets. Everyone had an opinion, and almost everyone felt something. In offices, arguments broke out. Men who were about to be drafted questioned themselves, could they refuse? Did standing by their conscience make them un-American? In classrooms, teachers struggled to explain Ali's words to students who were too young to understand war but old enough to sense bravery. In bars and diners, patrons shouted at televisions or whispered conspiratorially, some angry, some awestruck. Television networks replayed the interview endlessly, dissecting every phrase. Analysts debated whether Ali's career was over. Sports commentators argued over whether he could ever fight again. The boxing world was in turmoil. Fans were divided between admiration and disbelief. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, one undeniable fact remained: Muhammad Ali had changed the conversation. He had forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about race, war, and morality. Meanwhile, Ali's own life began to feel the weight of his decision. Letters poured in, some praising him for his courage, others threatening him. Religious leaders, politicians, and civil rights activists all weighed in, each seeing Ali as a symbol of something larger than sport. He became more than a boxer. He became a lightning rod for debate, a mirror reflecting the country's fears and biases. Even within the boxing community, tensions ran high. Promoters questioned whether he could still headline fights. Fellow athletes whispered about the danger of speaking out. But Ali remained undeterred. He continued to train in secret, honing his skills, knowing that one day he might return to the ring, not as a defiant man, but as a champion who had fought the hardest fight of all, the fight for conscience. Across America, the reactions were visceral. Families argued at dinner tables. Communities debated at town halls. In some areas, protests erupted, not against the war itself, but against Ali personally. In others, he was hailed as a hero, a man willing to pay the price of standing up for what he believed in. His stance became a symbol, a litmus test for courage, morality, and the right to dissent. The media frenzy reached an unprecedented level. Every day, journalists called his agents, television crews sought interviews, and pundits speculated endlessly. Will he fight? Will he be drafted? Is he a patriot or a rebel? Every question was a reflection of the larger struggle America was facing, a nation grappling with war, racial inequality, and the meaning of personal responsibility. Ali, however, remained calm. While the world erupted in chaos, he stayed true to himself. He understood that fear was a tool others used to control people. But courage, real courage, was a decision. And he had already made that choice. He wasn't afraid of losing his titles, his money, or even his freedom. He was afraid of compromising the principles that defined him. As the nation reeled from his words, one thing became clear. Muhammad Ali had not just given an interview. He had set the stage for history. Millions were talking. Millions were questioning. Millions were being forced to see the world in a way they hadn't before. His defiance wasn't just personal, it was transformational. And while the backlash was fierce, the admiration was growing. Slowly, quietly, Americans began to understand what it truly meant to stand for something. The story of the man who refused to fight a war he didn't believe in was just beginning, and the consequences of his actions would ripple across the country for years to come. The interview had ended hours ago, but its echoes were far from finished. Across the country, televisions flickered in homes, bars, offices, and schools, replaying the image of Muhammad Ali, calm, composed, defiant, speaking words that would ripple through history. I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. They never called me an R. They never put chains on my hands. They never lynched me. Millions heard him that night, some in disbelief, some in admiration, and many in both emotions at once. The words weren't just shocking, they were revolutionary. They challenged a nation at war, a country grappling with racial injustice, and a public conditioned to expect conformity from its heroes. Ali hadn't just answered a question, he had drawn a line in the sand. Across America, reactions were intense. Newsrooms dissected every syllable, columnists debated his morality. Politicians criticized him, some for defiance, others for audacity. The boxing world was thrown into turmoil. Promoters argued over whether he could still headline fights. Fans shouted over televisions, some demanding punishment, others praising his courage. But beyond the chaos, one undeniable truth emerged. Muhammad Ali's words had captured the nation's attention in a way no boxing match ever could. What made the interview resonate wasn't just the content, it was Ali himself. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He didn't shout or gesticulate wildly. He sat calmly, with a steady gaze and measured tone, as if his words carried the weight of history itself. Millions of viewers recognized the extraordinary courage it took to say what he said, knowing full well the consequences. In the following days, his interview became a touchstone for conversation about war, race, and conscience. Students debated it in classrooms. Clergy spoke of it from pulpits. Activists used it as a rallying cry. And everywhere, people asked the same question: how could a man of his fame, fortune, and influence willingly risk it all for principle? Letters poured into Ali's camp, from supporters, critics, and curious strangers alike. Some threatened him, warning him of the consequences of defiance. Others praised him, seeing in him a model of integrity and bravery. Editors debated whether to cover his next fight, his next statement, his every move. But Ali understood that the fight that truly mattered wasn't in the ring. It was for the nation's conscience, for its willingness to face uncomfortable truths, and for the courage to act according to principle. Even his peers were divided. Fellow athletes whispered, some in awe, some in disbelief. Few had the courage to speak as boldly as Ali, and fewer still had the foresight to understand the impact of such a stand. But Ali's consistency, his calm in the storm, and his refusal to back down made him a symbol larger than sport. Across the world, the interview was broadcast internationally. People in Europe, Asia, and Africa watched, realizing that this wasn't just about a boxer or a war. It was about a human being willing to stand for what he believed was right, despite tremendous personal cost. His words resonated far beyond America, echoing in the hearts of those oppressed, marginalized, or forced to fight battles not of their own choosing. Ali's words began to shape a cultural shift. They were quoted in newspapers, magazines, and speeches. They inspired activists and fueled debates about the morality of war and the rights of conscience. The man who could have been silent had instead spoken, and his voice, calm, unwavering, principled, became louder than any rhetoric his opponents could muster. By the end of that week, it was clear Muhammad Ali's interview had not just sparked a momentary controversy. It had created a movement of thought, a touchstone of moral courage. People argued, debated, and even protested, but they could not ignore him. He had forced the nation to look in the mirror, and in that reflection many saw not just a boxer, but a man who dared to defy expectations for the sake of truth. Ali hadn't lost a fight. He hadn't even thrown a punch. Yet in the hearts and minds of millions, he had won the most important battle of all, the battle for conscience, courage, and the unyielding belief that doing what is right is worth any cost. And so, while the interview may have ended on live television, its echoes continued to reverberate through homes, workplaces, and public squares. Millions would remember that night forever, the night Muhammad Ali didn't just speak, he changed the conversation, and in doing so, changed history itself. The world that had once cheered for Muhammad Ali in the ring now seemed determined to punish him outside it. The backlash from his bold stand against the Vietnam War wasn't just verbal, it came with real consequences. Boxing authorities stripped him of his heavyweight title. His license to fight was revoked. His passport was confiscated. And most devastating of all, he faced legal charges that could put him behind bars for years. Ali, however, did not flinch. He had always known that courage came with a price. He had predicted the anger, the ridicule, and the punishment. But principle, he knew, was worth more than titles or money. While other athletes might have bowed to pressure, Ali chose a different path, one that would test not only his patience, but his resilience, his intellect, and his faith. The legal battle was long, grueling, and public. Ali faced the full force of the United States legal system, including prosecutors determined to make an example of him. Courtrooms were packed with journalists, photographers, and curious onlookers. The eyes of the nation watched every argument, every witness, every motion. Ali's every word, his demeanor, even his appearance was scrutinized. The man who had once dominated opponents in the ring was now fighting for his freedom, his reputation, and his right to live according to his conscience. Through it all, Ali remained composed. He appeared in court wearing simple suits, his voice calm but firm, his posture unyielding. He explained that his refusal to fight was not a rejection of his country, but a commitment to his beliefs. "I have no quarrel with those who are not like me," he said. "I will not participate in a war that does not belong to me, against people who have done me no harm." Every phrase was deliberate, every pause intentional. He turned the courtroom into a stage for his principles, and the world was watching. The fight extended for years. Appeals, hearings, and legal wrangling consumed his days. During this period, Ali was forced to live without the sport that had defined him, without the title that had brought him fame, and without the income that had supported his family. Yet he trained in secret, honing his skills, staying ready for the day when he could return, and he never wavered from his convictions. Then in 1971, after years of uncertainty, the Supreme Court of the United States handed down a unanimous decision. Muhammad Ali's conviction was overturned. The highest court in the country declared that he had the right to stand by his conscience. Justice had prevailed. The man who had been vilified, criticized, and punished was vindicated. When Ali stepped back into the boxing ring, it was more than a return to sport. It was a triumph of principle over conformity, of courage over fear. Fans cheered not just for his fists, but for the integrity he had displayed outside the ropes. He had lost years of his prime, but he had gained something far greater: the respect of millions, and a place in history as more than a champion boxer. He was a champion of conscience. Across the nation, people began to re-evaluate what they had thought of Ali. What once seemed rebellion now appeared as moral courage. His stand against the Vietnam War became a defining moment in civil rights history, inspiring generations of athletes, activists, and ordinary citizens to question authority and act according to their principles. Ali had proven a profound truth: real victory isn't always measured by trophies, belts, or money. Sometimes, victory is measured by the willingness to endure hardship, to stand alone, and to risk everything for what is right. The Supreme Court's decision didn't just restore his right to fight. It affirmed the power of conscience, the value of courage, and the legacy of a man who had refused to compromise his soul. By the time he returned to the ring, Muhammad Ali was no longer just a fighter. He was a symbol of resilience, integrity, and moral strength. His punches still dazzled crowds, but it was his courage outside the ropes that truly defined him. He had faced public outrage, legal battles, and personal sacrifice, and emerged stronger, wiser, and immortalized in history. And the nation, once divided in opinion, slowly came to recognize what millions had long understood. Muhammad Ali had fought a different kind of battle, and he had won it with the same precision, strategy, and fearlessness that had made him the greatest in the ring. Muhammad Ali's story didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling or when the courts cleared his name. His journey was bigger than boxing, bigger than titles, bigger than fame. It was about the principles that guide a life, the courage to act when no one is watching, and the power of standing up for what is right. Ali had faced a nation's scrutiny, the wrath of the media, and the legal might of the government. He had lost his championship, his license, and years of his career. Yet through it all he remained unwavering. He did not compromise, apologize, or retreat. His conscience was his guide, and it never faltered. That courage, more than any title belt, became his true victory. In the years that followed, Ali's bold stand inspired generations. Athletes began to realize that their platform was more than entertainment. It was influence, responsibility, and an opportunity to speak truth to power. Students learned in classrooms, activists chanted on streets, and ordinary people in everyday lives began to understand the value of standing firm, even when the world opposed them. Ali's legacy extended far beyond the ring. He became a symbol of resistance against injustice, a living example that personal integrity could outweigh societal expectations. His refusal to fight in Vietnam showed that real strength wasn't measured in muscle, but in moral courage. A man could face the fury of an entire nation and still hold his head high. A man could lose everything and yet remain victorious in the ways that truly matter. The lessons from Ali's life resonate even today. Respect, humility, and conviction are timeless virtues. His story reminds us that the greatest battles often occur outside the spotlight. When we act with integrity, when we speak for the voiceless, when we refuse to betray our principles, we echo the courage of a man who refused to fight an unjust war, even at great personal cost. And yet, Ali's influence was not just symbolic, it was practical. He redefined what it meant to be a champion. The world had seen boxers before, but few had used their fame to challenge injustice. Ali showed that being a champion meant more than knocking down opponents in a ring. It meant lifting up values, defending conscience, and speaking truth, even when it came at a personal price. Throughout his life, Ali continued to demonstrate humility, compassion, and leadership. He worked tirelessly for humanitarian causes, visited children in hospitals, and used his fame to draw attention to global issues. The same voice that had silenced millions in that historic interview in 1967 now inspired hope, courage, and action across generations. Perhaps the most profound lesson from Ali's story is this: courage is contagious. One man's refusal to bow, to compromise, to conform, can ignite the conscience of an entire nation. One act of principle can ripple through history, influencing countless others to stand for what they believe is right. Muhammad Ali's courage reminds us that true power is not in fear or control, but in conviction and integrity. As we remember him today, it's not just for his speed, strength, or championships. It's for the life he lived with purpose, courage, and conscience. He became a legend not only because he fought in the ring, but because he fought in the heart of a nation, refusing to be silenced, refusing to compromise, and leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire courage and moral strength around the world. Muhammad Ali's life teaches us that respect isn't earned by wealth or fame. It's earned through character, through courage, and through the willingness to stand for what is right, no matter the cost. And if you take anything from his story, let it be this. True strength is moral courage. True victory is integrity. And true legacy is inspiring others to fight for conscience, even when the fight seems impossible. Type ALI in the comments if you believe courage and conviction define true greatness. Where are you watching from? I want to hear your story too, because Ali's message is universal, timeless, and alive in every one of us.